I don't remember how long I waited by the window that night. The wall clock struck 7 times, a harsh, echoing sound in the once cozy kitchen. The tea in the pot had gone cold. The faint smell of gingerbread I had baked lingered in the air like a radio signal waiting for a response. Thomas always came home at 7, precise to the minute. But that night, the door stayed still, the lock didn't turn, the floor didn't creak, and inside me, something quietly crumbled. You might think I overreacted. A husband coming home late from work, what's so strange about that? But for me, a former military intelligence officer who lived by discipline, down to the second, every breath that silence was like an internal alarm blaring. I am Vivien Marshall. I once read satellite maps in Baghdad, analyzed voices over encrypted satellite lines, monitored an entire city without stepping out of a windowless room in the Pentagon. But no mission ever made me feel as helpless as that night when I couldn't understand why my husband didn't come home. At exactly 7:08 p.m. The phone rang. A male voice, deep and trying to stay calm, came through the line. "Is this Mrs. Thomas Marshall?" I could sense something was wrong in the tone alone. My heart tightened as if gripped by an iron glove. The man introduced himself as a doctor from Charleston Medical Center. Thomas, the man I believed was as solid as an ancient building, had collapsed in his office. They said it was a heart attack. He passed quickly without pain. We did everything we could. I didn't hear the rest. I stood still for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear. On the table, the plates of food had gone cold, the dishes neatly arranged like a ritual of our 15-year marriage. But none of it mattered anymore when the person I was waiting for would never return. The funeral took place 3 days later. I attended like a shadow. Black high-neck dress hair, neatly pinned military badge on my chest as a reflex. I didn't cry. Strangely, the tears didn't come. Perhaps because I had seen too many deaths. But this was the first time my heart was struck down, not by bullets, but by the betrayal of fate. The crowd of mourners was large, uncomfortably so. Unfamiliar faces, awkward hugs, and hollow condolences. He was so kind. Thomas was a model man. I felt like a stranger at my own husband's funeral. Amid the crowd, Rachel, my sister, appeared. She approached, eyes red, her vanilla perfume cloyingly sweet. She hugged me for a long time too long, making me uneasy. "I'm so sorry, sis. Thomas was a great man, like a brother to me." I nodded faintly, but later that evening, after everyone had left, I saw Rachel pouring wine in the kitchen with practiced ease, as if she were in her own apartment. She held the glass leaning against the counter. "Sis, I know it's not the right time, but Thomas lent me some money. I was thinking, maybe now's the time to settle things." I turned eyes unblinking. "What loan?" Rachel gave a small smile, lips pursed. "Oh, he probably didn't mention it. It's fine. I just thought, with the insurance and everything, you could handle it easily." Easily. The word echoed in my head like a fatal blow. I nodded, a reflex from my military days of gathering information. But from that moment I knew something was wrong. I couldn't sleep. I wandered the house, touching everything as if it could speak the truth. The wedding photo frame, the reading chair, the shirt he left on the hook. On the entryway table I saw Thomas's keychain still lying there, and a particular key I had never used. I had asked about that key years ago. Thomas just laughed, just an old storage unit, love, full of dirty tech stuff, nothing interesting. And like any wife trained in silence, I didn't ask again. But this time I opened Google Maps, traced the coordinates. A row of storage units in an old industrial area south of Charleston. I had passed through there once during an investigation into an illegal supply chain. Now the place was desolate. Wind whistled through rusted fences. Grass grew through cracked concrete. Unit 4B. I inserted the key. The lock was stiff but eventually turned. The metal door creaked open with a sharp screech. The smell of dust and oil clung to me like an old memory. But what was inside stopped me cold. Not a storage unit, not a toolbox. It was an underground intelligence room. Walls plastered with photos, satellite maps, handwritten notes, lines connecting into a spiderweb, and at the center, Thomas's photo. But not Thomas in a suit, polished and pristine. Thomas in jeans, a wrinkled shirt, messy hair. He was smiling, a smile I hadn't seen in years. Beside him, a young woman brunette with bright eyes, and in many photos they were traveling together. There was also a young man, his face painfully familiar. I knew what I was looking at. I didn't need a DNA test. The woman was Isabel, and the young man their son. The room spun, the air thick. I stumbled toward the desk, touching a file. The first line hit me like a punch. Crescent Heart Institute. Ischemic heart disease, stage 3. High risk of sudden death. Thomas knew. He knew he was dying. But he didn't tell me. No warning. No confession. He chose to let me wait in the kitchen with cold tea and an untouched meal. That night I returned home in silence. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I just felt empty. I had thought I knew Thomas, the man who was never late, who brought flowers every Sunday. But it turned out I only knew half of him. I sat by the window, the key still in my hand, and I promised myself I would find the other half. Have you ever lived with someone for 15 years, only to realize in the end you knew nothing about them? I thought I knew Thomas down to his every breath. His habits were like a biological clock. Black coffee, no sugar. At 6:30 a.m. shirts, always pressed white lilies every Sunday. He never got angry, never late, never forgot our anniversary. And me, I'm Vivien Marshall, former intelligence officer. I worked missions in the Middle East, extracted intel from fragments smaller than a hair. Yet, I lived with a man for a third of my life and didn't see the truth right in front of me. That was how it felt when I inserted the key into the lock of Unit 4B, a gray, weathered storage facility behind an industrial park south of Charleston. The door opened with a harsh, metallic screech. I took a deep breath, dust and rusted metal hitting my face. In my head, an old voice echoed my counterintelligence instructor. Every forbidden key leads to a place you're not meant to touch, because that's where the truth lies. Inside, it wasn't completely dark, but the light, filtering through the translucent roof, only outlined the rough shapes of objects. I fumbled for the light switch. The fluorescent bulb flickered a few times before illuminating the room like an untouched crime scene. No car, no toolbox or spare tire. Instead, investigation boards, photographs, files. A wall covered in images like a makeshift intelligence command center set up by Thomas himself. I shuddered, partly from the cold air, partly from what I was seeing, not a storage unit, but an information hub. A crude replica of where I used to work, but complete with every element movement, maps, candid photos, financial connection diagrams, timelines. And at the center, Thomas, in every photo. Not my Thomas, the man in a suit tie, knotted pristine as a promise. But Thomas from another world, a man in a faded shirt, messy hair, an uncontrolled smile. And he was with another woman, Isabel. I didn't know her name then, but I recognized her face glimpsed once in a photo Thomas posted briefly on social media before deleting it. A woman at least 10 years younger than me. Deep, sharp eyes. And in many photos they weren't just acquaintances, they were a couple. They had photos at the beach, on ski slopes, in candlelit restaurants. And in one photo pinned to the center of the board, they sat with a young man. His eyes, familiar to the point of suffocation. That was their son. I stood frozen for minutes. My mind didn't race or panic. It paused. As if my military brain was trying to process this as a covert operation, not a shattered marriage. I turned away, knees weak, hands bracing the wooden desk in the middle of the room. Dust stirred. I looked down papers scattered everywhere. Bank receipts, money transfer contracts, tax documents from companies with unfamiliar names. Mercury South Holdings, Solace Pacific Ltd. Money trails from the Bahamas to Zurich to Panama. Among them a medical file from Crescent Heart Institute, stamped confidential. The first line ischemic heart disease, stage 3, high risk of sudden death. He knew. Thomas knew he was going to die. He had time to tell me, time to explain. But instead he chose to build a base for a life I was never part of. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes. Military reflex made me check the room's structure looking for anything hidden. I pulled open a drawer. An envelope fell out. No sender's name. But I recognized Thomas's handwriting. Vivien, if you find this place, I'm sorry. But if you open it, you deserve to know everything. I didn't open the letter. Not because I wasn't ready, but because I wanted to uncover each piece myself before hearing his final confession. A liar skilled enough to live 2 lives without leaving a crack. I left the unit at dusk. The sky was stained red like an open wound. I got in the car, started the engine hands still trembling. And then my phone rang. An unknown number. No name saved. I answered, saying nothing. A male voice, deep polite, but laced with a thin thread of tension. "Mrs. Marshall, I think you've found something you shouldn't have." I didn't respond. He continued, "Your husband and I were partners, but now that he's gone, I hope you'll cooperate. There are documents of great value." I hung up, not because I was afraid, but because I knew I was being watched. Thomas once told me during a rare drunken night, everyone has a blind spot, Vivi. The place you think is safe, but it's actually the most dangerous. I had loved him from that blind spot. I returned home, slammed the door, locked it with 3 layers of security. I took out paper and wrote everything down: the room's layout, the money trails, Isabel's photos. And then I remembered in my military files there was a report mentioning a target code named B79A, suspected of involvement in cross-border money laundering. Back then I didn't know who B79A was. The data was encrypted, but I still had a copy of the financial section transaction codes, matching what I'd just seen in the unit. I would check, tonight, because if I was right, not only had Thomas lied to me, but I myself had once been ordered to monitor my own husband, without knowing. There are moments in life when you wish you'd never learned the truth. Not because you fear it, but because you know once that door is opened, you can never go back to who you were before. I had walked into secret rooms, underground meeting halls, where the world trembled over a single typo. But nowhere suffocated me like the room in Unit 4B, where my husband had secretly built a world without me. I stood there staring at the photos plastered across the walls. Thomas, the man I slept beside for 15 years, was in every frame. But a completely foreign version. No tie, no pressed shirt, no cautious expression or eyes that anticipated my every reaction. Just a natural smile that left me speechless. Beside him, that woman appeared again and again, Isabel. Younger than me. Light brown curls, eyes that seemed to know the world's secrets. But what tightened my chest wasn't her existence. It was how Thomas looked at her. As if he truly breathed when he was with her. As if I'd never known what it meant for him to live. And then, Logan. The young man with eyes carrying Thomas's gaze. I didn't need a DNA test. My instincts as both a woman and a former intelligence officer were certain he was their son. I'd heard stories of husbands with affairs, even secret children. But no one told me how it feels to analyze the crime scene of the person you love's life, as if you're both the victim and the only one allowed to seek the truth. I took down a photo. My hands trembled. The smell of old paper and dusty wood mingled. In the desk drawer among scattered files and dried-out markers, I found a medical file carefully tucked into a green folder. Crescent Heart Institute, Thomas R. Marshall, ischemic heart disease, stage 3, prognosis, high risk, sudden cardiac arrest. I read the line 3 times. Thomas knew. He knew he was dying. He'd been diagnosed, monitored, hidden it. And instead of preparing us, he chose to live another life in a world where I didn't exist. The question flashing in my mind wasn't why, but how long had he been preparing for this? Have you ever discovered the person you love was preparing for their death not to leave you a goodbye, but to protect another world? If so, tell me. I need to hear other voices, to know I'm not the only one surviving a counterfeit life. I pulled out another thicker file, no name, no label. Inside were company documents. Share transfer records, offshore contracts, legal papers signed. Thomas Marshall. The company name Mercury South Holdings. I'd never heard of it, and I'd heard of a lot. The ownership structure was cleverly concealed, 3 layers of shell companies, outsourced legal representatives, ghost addresses in the Cayman Islands and Singapore. I recognized these tactics. I'd taught recruits how to spot financial shells in an anti-money laundering operation a decade ago. But I never thought I'd see them in my own marriage. And then something made my blood run cold. I saw a logo faintly printed on one page, Phoenix Data Recovery. Classified Clearance Level C. Phoenix was the name of a secure data decryption system used only in national-level operations. I'd heard of it once in a briefing in Qatar. It shouldn't be here, but it was. Thomas wasn't just a financially savvy businessman. He was involved in something far beyond an affair. And the worst part, I might have been warned about him and didn't realize it. I suddenly recalled a report from years ago when I was still in the service. An encrypted file subject B79A, suspected of illegal money transfers from Europe to the US through fake investment firms. The file didn't name anyone. I wasn't allowed to know who, but I remembered a transaction code clearly MSHLT0324. I went back to the desk, flipping to the fourth bank statement in the Mercury South Holdings file. My heart stopped. Transaction code MSHLT0324. No mistake. Thomas was B79A. I had been tasked with monitoring my own husband without knowing. I had held his criminal file in my hands, read the financial data he created, analyzed the transfer routes he hid, and I hadn't seen it. I had chosen to believe the man lying beside me every night was an honest husband, not a link in a black market financial network. I don't remember how long I stayed in the unit. When I stepped outside, it was dark. The sky was starless. Only thick black clouds like a play that had gone on too long. I drove home in silence. But my mind was no longer silent. It raced with military tactics, identify the target, assess the risk plan, the response. I knew what I needed next, access old intelligence files. I needed to verify not just by instinct, but with evidence. I opened the safe at home, where I kept files from my military days, things I thought I'd never need again. Subject B79A. I found it. And right on the first line of page 3, suspected subject, linked to Mercury South Holdings. Internal code MSH, LT0324. I closed the file hands, still gripping it tightly. I had seen the truth, touched it. But because I loved him, because I trusted him, I hadn't seen clearly. Was that a sin? I don't know. But I know this time I wouldn't look away. Nothing is quieter than a room holding the truth. It doesn't scream, doesn't threaten, doesn't present bloody evidence. It just sits there, patient, silent, waiting for you to have the courage to face it. I never thought I'd return to the military data system. After leaving the service, I swore I'd leave it all behind: codes, missions, nameless faces, and encrypted files that kept people awake at night. But like a curse, it called me back. Not for honor or duty, but for Thomas. I powered up my specialized computer, connecting to the agency's private network, once the center of my life. My old access code still worked, perhaps because they didn't think I'd return, or maybe because they knew one day I'd have to. I typed into the search bar B79A. The file appeared almost instantly. A triple encrypted PDF requiring biometric authentication. I hesitated before placing my finger on the scanner. A strange truth, I wasn't trembling. Perhaps because once you step into the realm of darkness, you stop fearing it. The file opened. Familiar format data tables, analysis, strategic notes. But every word sank deeper into my mind this time. Because now the name hidden behind B79A was Thomas Marshall, my husband. I scrolled to the suspected financial behavior overview. It was like a replay of what I saw in the unit. Transaction codes, international transfer logs, even the shell company addresses in the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg all matched the papers in Mercury South Holdings. I paused at a line I'd read and forgotten back then. Unidentified personal signature, suspected handwritten, repeated in 7 documents. I pulled out the printed files from the unit, compared them. No doubt, the same handwriting. Thomas. That's when I realized I had held my husband's criminal file in my hands and didn't know. I had evaluated it like any other target analyzed, charted then. Set it aside because there was no definitive evidence. I had monitored Thomas. Not as a wife, but as an officer. A soldier. I was ordered to surveil the man I loved. But I didn't see it because he hid himself so well. Or because I chose not to see. I sat motionless for a long time after reading the file. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I was starting to believe too much. Thomas didn't just betray me with Isabel. He built an international underground financial system significant enough to be on the government's priority watch list. So, what was our marriage? A cover, a safe haven, or simply a part of his life he tried to keep normal. I returned home in silence. The shadows stretched long in the hallway, as if the house itself knew the truth and was ashamed. I opened my personal safe, where I kept files from my service days. Each file was a mark, blood, tears, and mistakes. But I never thought one of those mistakes would be Thomas. I found the appendix analysis for B79A lines dim under the desk lamp, but sharp as a scalpel. Subject likely has access to classified information. Indirect link to Phoenix decryption technology. Recommend transferring file to internal control designate female officer code VM. VM, that was me. They had assigned me. They knew, and they said nothing to see what I'd do. But I didn't find out. Or I didn't want to find out. Shame isn't like betrayal. It's a quiet moan in your mind, reminding you that you should have known, but you chose not to. I closed the file, took a deep breath, and stood up. I was no longer an officer, but I was still the only one who could uncover everything. Not for revenge, but to understand. Because only by understanding could I forgive, and only by forgiving could I move on. I turned on the computer again, this time to find people who could help trace Mercury South Holdings. I needed someone skilled in financial tech who could follow shell company networks. And above all, I needed people who wouldn't ask why a widow had files on an international money laundering network. The strange thing is, when you accept the truth, you also learn to act not out of pain, but out of duty. A voluntary duty. I was no longer the victim of this story. I had decided to rewrite it. I once thought the hardest thing in life was looking into the eyes of someone who betrayed you. But no, the hardest thing is looking into those eyes again when they're on someone else's face. Younger, more honest, and unaware that they're the storm you're trying to escape. Logan appeared at my door on a cloudy morning. His thin brown jacket made him look older than his age, but his eyes carried the unease of someone still discovering themselves. He didn't carry a suitcase, just a backpack and an envelope. "I'm Logan," he said, voice low and calm. "Thomas's son." The words didn't hit my heart as I expected. Not because I was prepared, but because I had seen it before in the photos in the unit, in the way Thomas looked at Isabel, in the smile I never saw when he was with me. I invited him in without saying more. In that strange moment, neither of us asked what the other needed. We just sat down, separated by an old wooden table with a faint crack on the edge. Logan placed the envelope on the table. "He gave this to me 2 weeks before he died," he said, sliding it toward me. "No notary, but he said if I met you to give it to you." I opened the letter. Thomas's familiar handwriting filled the page like a final lingering breath. A draft will. Some assets listed briefly. Investments under Mercury South Holdings. And a small handwritten note. The code is in the last gift for V, the sapphire necklace. I touched my neck, though the necklace was safely tucked in a drawer. When I received it, I thought it was a belated apology. Now I knew it was a key. "Do you know what Mercury South is?" I asked. Logan nodded. "After Mom died, I checked the finances. There were accounts in my name I never opened. When I traced the money, I found this company. But it has no office. No employees, just exists on paper and in bank transactions." "Who else is involved besides Thomas?" "A few names I heard Mom mention," Logan replied, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "Gordon Blake, Victor Crane, maybe more." I wasn't unfamiliar with those names. In the intelligence world, they were like shadows under a street lamp, never fully visible, but always leaving traces after every deal. "Why did you come to me?" I asked. "Not for money," Logan said. In that moment, I believed him. "I just need to know who my father really was. You lived with him. You knew how good or bad he could be. I only knew half." I leaned back, my heart heavy. Most of what I thought I knew about Thomas had turned to illusion. "Thomas was a great actor," I said. "Always on time, brought flowers every Sunday. Knew the tea I liked, how I folded napkins. But now I think maybe it was all a disguise. For me. For you. For himself." Logan didn't react. He just looked at me with eyes mixed with hope and disappointment. "I don't want to inherit anything from him," he said slowly. "My mom Isabel is the only one I owe anything to. If I can, I'd like to use that money if you agree to start a charity in her name." I looked at Logan. In his eyes was the integrity I'd seen in old comrades, people who chose what was right over what was easy. Perhaps Isabel had raised him with the best a mother could give. "A fund for who?" I asked. "Single mothers," he replied. "Women like my mom, raising kids alone, loving someone who was never fully there." His words were like a gentle but sharp knife cutting through the emotional wall I'd built. I didn't cry. But if you've ever heard words that make you feel like you've reclaimed a piece of lost humanity, you'd understand. I reached out. Logan took my hand firm and calm. For the first time since Thomas died, I didn't feel alone. When he left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching his tall, lanky figure disappear behind the trees. I didn't know what Thomas had taught him, but clearly Isabel had taught him what was right. I took the sapphire necklace from its box, flipped the clasp. A small click sounded. Inside was a tiny metal plate like a SIM card, etched with numbers, a safe's code. That night I dreamed of Thomas, not the Thomas in a crisp suit, but a man sitting by the sea, half his face in light, half in shadow, and I woke with a clear resolve I would go to his office. Open the safe. Find the final truth. Some doors aren't opened with just a key, but with the courage to step through. Thomas's office was on the 14th floor of a glass building in Charleston's quiet business district. I'd passed by it many times, but never thought that behind those frosted windows lay a world I'd never touched, a world my husband built in silence, leaving nothing for himself. I went there on a Monday morning with Logan. He carried Thomas's old access card, and I wore the sapphire necklace that revealed the hidden code. The tiny numbers etched inside the gem whispered to me he thought of this. Thought of a day I'd find the final door he left behind. The elevator to the 14th floor was so fast it threw off my sense of balance. Logan said nothing. Neither did I. The air between us was a different kind of silence, not distance, but an unformed respect. The office appeared plain perfect, emotionless. No family photos, no fresh flowers. No sign that the person who worked here had loved anyone, had lived truly. Logan moved to the abstract painting behind the desk as he said the safe was hidden there. I removed the necklace, twisted the clasp. The metal plate popped out. Logan inserted it into the keypad on the wall. A beep, then a click. The small door opened. I leaned down. I didn't know what I expected, an explanation, a flaw in the web of lies, or even a scrap of leftover affection. But what I saw was cold to the point of pain documents on offshore accounts, contracts under false names, passport copies from countries I'd suspected as money laundering hubs, and a ring. Placed in a small ebony box, no velvet lining, no lid. I picked it up, a wedding band, plain, simple, elegant, but inside a single inscription, N always. N, not V, Isabel. Logan stood behind me, silent. Maybe he knew. Maybe he just found out. But we both understood what didn't need saying. Thomas had planned to marry Isabel, or had in another world, one I'd never entered. What do you think I should have done? Raged, smashed the box. I did nothing. Because in that moment I realized I was too late to fight for anything with a dead man and a woman who loved him in her own loneliness. I placed the ring back in the box, looked at Logan. Anything else? He nodded. This. He pulled a thin beige file from the top shelf. On it, draft, not filed. Second will. I flipped through the pages. Most repeated what I'd seen, divided assets, shares in Mercury South Holdings. But on the last page, something took my breath away. 25% of asset value transferred to a trust fund for the unborn child of Rachel Carter. Payable upon reaching 21. Rachel. Not her name, just the unborn child of Rachel. No rights, no title, not a word of affection. I set the file down. He knew everything Logan said, and didn't trust her. Silence enveloped the room again. You might ask, why didn't I break down? Why didn't I scream, tear up the will? But I'd worn a uniform, seen life and death on battlefields. Death in any form is just an incomplete message, and sometimes the living must learn to read the rest. Do you think I should keep these documents? I asked Logan. No, he replied. I think you should back them up. Then give them to someone you truly trust. I nodded. Claire. My best friend's name surfaced like the only intact lifeline left. The one who never asked too much but always knew what to do. On the way out of the building, I caught my reflection in the elevator's mirror. Not a broken wife, not an intelligence officer, but a hybrid of two worlds. A woman following traces buried not just by secrets, but by blind love. At Claire's house, I told her everything. Logan sat beside me silent, letting me piece together the shards of memory. Claire didn't ask questions. She just made tea, then said, Now you need to think like a strategist. Not a wife anymore. I knew she was right. We'll back up all the data, I said. 1 copy for the lawyer. 1 kept separately. 1 in case I'd disappear, sent straight to the press. Before bed, I opened the ring box again. I don't know why I did it. Maybe curiosity, maybe regret. But as my finger traced N, always I realized the man I loved left nothing for himself, just a fragmented life divided among 3 women, none of us whole. I turned off the light. And for the first time since hearing of Thomas's death, I didn't cry. Because now I knew I had to be strong not just to survive, but to live on as the only one still holding the map through the storm he left behind. Not all the battles I've been through involved gunfire. Some came in silence with a saccharine smile and an expensive silk dress. I went to Rachel's apartment in the late afternoon. A light rain fell enough to blur my windshield, but not enough to make me turn back. The new condo complex where she lived was the opposite of her constant complaints about finances. Outside were electronic gates, security cameras everywhere, and inside, exactly the kind of place someone waiting to strike it rich would choose. Rachel opened the door with no surprise. She wore a pearl-colored silk robe holding a glass of red wine, as if she'd just stepped out of a high society party. "Oh, you're here. I thought you'd still be busy playing the perfect widow today." That was the first slap. I didn't respond. I stepped inside. The apartment was drenched in perfume, the air cold from heavy air conditioning, but everything inside only made me burn hotter inside. "Thomas came here," I asked, eyes pausing on a photo on the kitchen counter. Rachel and Thomas smiling, brightly, champagne glasses clinking like a perfect couple. "Of course. He liked this place. Private. No stupid questions." I turned, and the baby. Rachel didn't blink. 10 weeks. It's his. You don't need to ask. At that moment I couldn't hear the rain anymore. Just my heart pounding in my ears. "So, what are you going to do?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Use the pregnancy to get what?" She smirked. "I'm not asking for anything. But if you make things hard for me, there are stories the press would love. Like Thomas's offshore accounts or Mercury South Holdings, for example." She set the wine glass down, standing tall. "You know a widow who was an officer with access to classified archives, but didn't notice her husband was involved in money laundering, hard to believe, right?" I didn't answer, but my hands clenched. She wasn't just challenging me. She was threatening the honor of my entire career in the military. "Why are you doing this, Rachel?" I asked softly. "For money? Jealousy? Or because you could never stand living in someone else's shadow?" Her eyes flashed. For a moment. Then it was gone. "You had everything. A nice house, a loving husband, a stable life. And I was always the shadow. I'm just taking back what should have been mine." I looked into her eyes, and in a flash I no longer saw her as my sister. I pulled out my phone, opened the photo of Isabel, the woman from the unit's wall of photos, with her son Logan, with Thomas in moments I never had. "Do you know Isabel?" Rachel froze. "Yes, and her death. A coincidence, a car accident just a week after she booked a one-way ticket out of the U.S., after she told Thomas she'd expose everything." For the first time Rachel blinked. Once, slowly. "What are you talking about?" She had her car serviced 2 days before. No way the brakes failed. But the car was found with the brake lines tampered. And strangely, no cameras caught her leaving the parking lot that day. Rachel was silent. I took a step closer. "If you're not involved, why did you know the exact day Isabel planned to leave? Or was it because Thomas told you, and you realized that if she left everything you had would disappear?" No reaction. Just the tightening of her throat. And her eyes, now unable to hide their defensiveness. "I don't have proof," I said, voice softer. "But I have a motive, and now I have a reason." The room fell so silent I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Finally, Rachel spoke. "You can't do anything. No documents, no witnesses, just suspicions." "Maybe," I said, "but maybe I'll send a summary of the investigation to a lawyer, and one to Logan. And if anything happens to me, I'm sure one of them will finish it." Rachel stood frozen. Her eyes went blank as if every door had slammed shut at once. I turned to leave. Before closing the door, I paused. "Congratulations, Rachel. You might give birth to a child with Thomas's blood, but you'll never teach it to be like him, because you never understood who he was." I went to Claire's that night, said nothing, just left the ring inscribed N, always on the table. She looked at me. Did she confess? I shook my head. She didn't need to. I didn't go for a confession. I went to let her know I'm not backing down. Claire made tea. And now? I looked out the window where the city lights flickered like fragments of memory. Now I'll find someone who knows more than she does. Someone who was Thomas's friend and knew when he was telling the truth. "Edward Holloway," Claire asked. I nodded. "The trip to Savannah starts tomorrow morning. I never thought an old pair of shoes could make me cry." That afternoon, when Logan left for Charleston to handle some paperwork regarding the inheritance, he refused. I stayed behind in Savannah. Edward Holloway, Thomas's college friend, had greeted us with the calm of someone who'd seen more than he cared to share. It was Edward who gave me the letter Thomas left behind. But not immediately. Not as a entrusted gift. As a condition. Only if you and Logan come together. If you return alone, it means you've made a choice. His words sent a chill through me. What choice I didn't dare imagine. I stayed at a small guest house on the city's edge, a place with a wooden porch and the smell of cinnamon tea in the halls. As I unpacked my suitcase, my eyes fell on Thomas's old military boots, something I'd stuffed in the bottom compartment on impulse. I brought them from Charleston. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd need something of his. Or maybe I wasn't brave enough to leave them behind. The boots were worn, the leather faded, the soles nearly flat. I used to tease him about keeping them like a nostalgic ritual. Thomas just smiled, never explaining. When I picked them up, I felt something bulky inside. Not a sock or insole. I reached in and my fingers touched a folded piece of paper. A letter. I sank to the floor, heart pounding like a war drum. The envelope had no address, just Thomas's familiar handwriting for V. I opened it, hands trembling. The paper was yellowed at the folds. The ink slightly smudged as if it had absorbed time itself. Vivien. If you're reading this, I probably didn't have enough time to say everything I should have. I'm not good at writing letters. I'm a man of silence, you know that. But some silences only cause more pain. Isabel was light. You were home. She made me feel young again, like a version of Thomas before duty took over. But you were the only thing keeping me from falling apart. When I came home, heard you washing dishes, saw you quietly making tea, setting my shirt on the sofa, brushing your hair every evening. That's when I knew I was surviving. When I left you, I was just trying to exist. You were the only peace I ever had. I stopped. The wind whispered outside the window. I looked up, everything in the room seemed to fade, leaving just me and the words. Thomas had loved me. Maybe not enough to be honest, not enough to choose decisively, but enough to be tormented until the end. I kept reading. I knew I didn't have much time left. The Crescent Heart file left no doubt. But instead of using my final months to make things right, I tried to escape. The more I hid from you, the worse I felt. Mercury South was my biggest mistake. It started as a way to secure money for Logan after Isabel lost her job. But it spiraled. People got involved. People threatened. I meant to confess. The night before I collapsed, I gave you the sapphire necklace. It wasn't just a gift. It was the key to the safe. I hoped you'd understand and forgive. If you're reading this, I can only say, don't forgive, because I deserve it. Forgive, because you need to live on. I folded the letter, clutching it to my chest, and I cried. Not out of anger, not out of pain, but because a tiny part of me was finally confirmed I hadn't been blind. That love had been real. I went downstairs, letter in hand. Claire, my only loyal friend, was on a video call checking in. I held it up for her to see. A handwritten letter, she asked, surprised. In his military boots, I said, with a faint smile. So very Thomas. Soldierly secretive. Claire was quiet for a moment, then softly, "What will you do next?" I looked into the distance. I don't know. But I know I can't keep standing between two sides like a shadow. Either I disappear, or I shine light on the truth for those left behind. Claire stared at me. Logan deserves to know not just about the shell company, but these words too. I nodded. And the baby in Rachel's womb. Though I don't know how yet. I returned to the room. For the first time in days, I opened my laptop not to search data, not to review files, but to write a summary. Everything, the letter, the old will, the Crescent file copy, the transfer list. I saved it all to a USB. One copy for me, one for Marcus Doyle, the lawyer. If something happened to me, the truth had to survive. That night before bed, I took the boots from the bag. For the first time since his death, I placed them beside my bed, as if Thomas might walk in at any moment. I knew that wouldn't happen. But I also knew for the first time since the funeral, I wasn't standing in the dark anymore. I thought I was prepared for everything. But I wasn't prepared for Logan walking into the room, eyes harder than before, placing a file on the table, and saying, "I won't take a cent of the inheritance. Use it to start a charity in my mother's name." I froze. Not because of the decision, but because of the heartbreaking calm in his voice. I know who my father was, Logan continued. He was good at keeping secrets, but he also had moments of kindness, half-hearted efforts that my mom always believed were real. I sat down, looking into his eyes. Then why refuse your mom? Isabel was part of everything Thomas left behind. Logan gave a faint smile. Because I don't need that money to remember her. I need something else, something that lasts longer, does better not to commemorate, but to help people like her. I touched the file lightly. The Isabel Fund. He nodded. To support single mothers, women left behind by men like Thomas. And if possible, I'd like to expand it to veterans like you. People who protected the nation, but no one protected them afterward. His words caught in my throat. It was the first time in weeks I shed tears not from betrayal or anger, but from something else, hope. Logan, I said softly, you don't have to do this alone. He looked at me, a tired but genuine smile. I know, neither do you. 3 days later, we officially filed for the Isabel Foundation at Marcus Doyle's law office. Claire came along, bringing coffee, a notebook, and a long list of potential donors she'd contacted in just 48 hours. Don't underestimate the power of a mom who attends PTA meetings, she winked. I know a lot of rich people who feel guilty. I laughed. Guilty for what? For never having to be a single mom, Claire replied. Or never having worn a uniform. Marcus handled the paperwork, bank accounts, trust setup. Logan signed the inheritance refusal with a firm signature. I allocated a portion of the remaining assets from the offshore accounts under Mercury South as the foundation's initial capital. I don't know what Thomas would think of this, I said, voice low, as I looked at the Isabel Foundation name on the registration. Claire glanced at me. He's not thinking anymore, Vivien. But you're still alive, and what you're doing is choosing to live with purpose. The first day we launched the foundation's website, we received over 200 applications for support from women who lost husbands in war, homeless veterans, single mothers in poor suburbs. I sat alone in the new office, Thomas's old meeting room, now stripped of soulless wall art and replaced with photos of Isabel smiling, playing with Logan holding a puppy. Logan gave me the photos from an old album, his hands trembling as he picked the first one. She didn't leave much behind. But at least now something carries her name. I said nothing, just placed a hand on his shoulder. In that moment, I realized I no longer saw Logan as Thomas's secret, but as a true legacy, beautiful, flawed, but honest. We didn't delude ourselves that starting a charity would make all the problems disappear. Thomas had too many dangerous connections, and not everyone would stay silent to let us do good. A week after the foundation launched, Claire received an anonymous email. Stop now. Mercury South isn't about charity. Don't think bleeding hearts can stop those who built a black market financial empire. Sent from an encrypted account. That same day, Marcus called to say a man named Gordon Blake, Thomas's old partner, had contacted the law office demanding a meeting. This guy has a history of transactions through Cayman accounts, Marcus said. I advise you not to meet him directly. I looked at Logan. He doesn't know what we have. And it's best to keep it that way, Logan replied, eyes cold as ice. That night, I hid the USB with all the critical files in a secret compartment in the kitchen under the tea bags. Another copy Claire sent to a third lawyer whose identity only she knew. We were no longer people standing on the sidelines of the truth. Now we were its keepers. I never put myself in a situation I couldn't control. But that final brunch, I had a feeling it would be a turning point. When I opened Edward's letter at the dinner table in Claire's cozy living room, my heart raced. It wasn't an ordinary letter. The first words written in italics were, Vivien, this is more serious than you know. I recalled how Edward spoke of his deep bond with Thomas from college, a trust beyond question. In the letter he wrote, Thomas once said that if he died, someone might deal with his wife and child if they knew too much. Those words sent a jolt through me. Deal with a polite way to say silenced, blackmailed, or dead for unknown reasons. I plugged in the flash drive Edward gave me. A folder appeared, Rachel D. I clicked. The first video was Thomas weary, sitting in a dimly lit office. He spoke. Vivi, if you're watching this, you've probably faced a lot of truths already. There's one thing I haven't said. Rachel, she's not an ordinary mistress. She's smart, ambitious, and more dangerous than you think. I suspect she knew more about Isabel than she let on. Maybe she feared Isabel would lift the curtain, or she had bigger ambitions and Isabel, a clean woman at the right time, right place, became a threat. I sat frozen, a mix of anger, hatred, and pity for Thomas, because he realized, too late, The second video was a recorded call a moment Rachel visited Thomas's office when they still maintained a facade of affection. But something was off. She seemed to be saying something about Isabel. I paused frame by frame, noting every word, her tone. In the video, Rachel spoke low. "You know there are some issues with Isabel. That woman isn't just a penniless wife in society. You should be careful when she plans to leave." Rachel looked straight at the camera in that moment. No fear, no hiding. Maybe she just suspected. Maybe she meant to warn. But her voice was cold enough to make me shiver. "Edward also found a handwritten note from Thomas. Rachel might know more than you, and you're the only woman still alive after what happened." For the first time since stepping into this story, I realized I was in the middle of a script far bigger. A wife, a mistress, a son, a secret, and a death still unsolved. I didn't want to fuel hatred. I didn't want to call lawyers police or make baseless accusations. I chose another way. Not a courtroom confrontation, but a brunch light with fresh flowers, quiche, and cappuccinos with perfect froth. I invited Rachel to Claire's house, a calm, non-confrontational place, no media. I said it was a brunch to talk, as two women who've been through the same man. Rachel arrived wearing a light midi dress. Her eyes hesitated. Maybe she thought I called out of old love. Maybe she thought I came to apologize. I placed a flash drive in front of her. No words. We both took a sip of tea. Then the first question. "What exactly do you know about Isabel?" Rachel froze. I looked into her eyes, saying nothing more. She shuddered as if seen through. And then she started talking, voice small. She spoke of unverified rumors Isabel had planned to leave Charleston. She had asked Thomas if he truly wanted to continue that life. She had visited him countless times in secret. I listened without reacting, because I had the cold blood to wait for her words, but also the heart to weigh each one for a hint of remorse. "When Isabel died," she said, voice cracking, maybe from tears, maybe from shame. I just said she was leaving to make a scene, to tell everything. I brushed it off. I was just scared of her because she was fair. I didn't think she'd go. Not strong enough. Not specific enough. But a sign. I slid the flash drive toward her. "This. It has a video of Thomas. He suspected you. He was worried about something. He wanted to warn." Rachel froze. The spark in her eyes vanished. "What do I need to say now?" she asked. I stood up, took the flash drive, left the table. Said nothing more. Rachel broke into tears. A silent, long cry. I didn't look back. Midnight, a text came from an unknown number. I opened it, heart sinking. "I know you have something that's not yours. A flash drive that could ruin everything. Let it go." I didn't reply. I didn't delete the message. I just stared at the screen and sighed. I lay down, wondered if I was playing with fire, but I knew I was ready to act. Some endings don't come with a bang. They drift in quietly like a late wave erasing footprints on the sand. I received Rachel's text on a gray morning. Just a photo. No message, no question mark. A picture of a newborn girl, rosy face, eyes half open, and those eyes I recognized instantly. "She has your eyes." The caption stopped me cold. For a moment, I forgot everything Rachel had done. The backstabbing. The half-truths. I only saw a tiny life, an extension of Thomas, of a painful truth I'd never fully controlled. Claire was making coffee in the kitchen when I walked in with the photo. She looked at me, saying nothing. Only when I placed the photo on the table did she ask softly, "The baby?" I nodded. "And she's healthy." "Yes," I replied. "Born in a private, quiet hospital." Rachel didn't let anyone know. Didn't want media, didn't want attention. Just wanted me to know. She exists. We were silent for a long time. The clink of a cup against a saucer was the only sound breaking the quiet. Then Claire asked very softly, "Have you forgiven her?" I placed my hand on the table. Didn't deny, didn't agree. No, but I choose not to add more pain. I called Marcus, the Isabel Foundation's lawyer. Asked to open a separate trust account for the child. Not under Rachel's name. Not under Thomas's. But under a temporary designation as a way to say I know, but I haven't chosen to forgive. I just choose not to hurt more. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked over the phone. "I can do this, but it'll need absolute confidentiality. It could be seen as child support." "I'm not supporting Rachel," I cut in. "I'm just giving a new life the start it deserves." After the call, I sent Rachel an envelope. Inside was nothing but a simple note notification that a small fund had been set up so the child, if she chooses, could take a different path later, free from the shadow of old mistakes. I got no response. I didn't need one. I returned to the Isabel Foundation on the third day after the photo was sent. Logan was reading a file from a single mother in Florida, a former engineer who lost her job after her husband died in Afghanistan. I stood at the door, watching him, feeling a weight lift from my heart. "You okay?" Logan asked when he saw me. "Fine. There's something you need to know." I told him about the baby, the photo, the trust account. Logan didn't react strongly, just stared at his hands thoughtfully. "Do you think she'll be like her father?" "Maybe not. But she has the right to choose who she'll be." He nodded. "And Rachel, she's taken herself out of the game. Now only the child needs protecting." I looked at Logan. "Are you angry?" "No," he said. "I don't want to repeat the cycle of anger. My mom taught me one thing: when people can't do good, at least don't make things worse." Claire stopped by the office at noon. She brought sandwiches and a small package. It was Thomas's old leather notebook from his days as a training officer. "Found it in a box of old military stuff. Thought you might want it." I opened it. Dense notes on tactics, maps, commands. Then on the last page, a single line. "If you must die, leave something behind, so others can live better." I read it over and over until tears spilled before I could stop them. Claire placed a hand on my shoulder. "Maybe that's all he could do for you," she said, in a strange roundabout way, but sincerely. I nodded. I can't make excuses for him, but I also can't keep living with just hatred. "So what will you do?" Claire asked. "I'll keep going," I replied. "For those still alive, for Isabel, for Logan, and for the baby just born with my eyes, but who might live a life not repeating mine. Some wars don't end with gunfire, but with silence, and some soldiers don't return in glory, but simply return." I moved to Colorado in late September with Logan and Claire. We chose a small town at the foot of the mountains with red-leafed porches, old wooden houses, and air that taught you to breathe anew. I didn't bring much, just a suitcase, a few old books, and a photo of me with Thomas from a day I'm no longer sure was real or fake. The rest I left behind like a soldier dropping sandbags climbing a pass. We started with a 2-story house, just enough for 3, but spacious enough for big plans. The ground floor became the office for the center, supporting veterans, single mothers, and survivors of domestic abuse. We named it the Isabel Center, not by chance. I wanted people to know her name, Isabel, the woman who raised a decent son alone in silence. The woman I never met, but who gave the world someone like Logan. And I wanted the world to remember that women don't need fanfare to do great things. Logan handled the finances. Claire, with her icy voice and memory that missed no detail, worked with lawyers, banks, and local authorities. And I spoke with the women who knocked on our door on rainy afternoons, holding small children, eyes cracked with pain. I knew them. I'd been part of them, though my scars took a different shape. A month later, I got a letter from Rachel. No apology. Just a photo of the baby in a green blanket, black eyes like Thomas's, but with something fiercer unclouded by ambiguity. Beneath the photo, she wrote, "She has your eyes." I didn't reply. But I sent a sum from the Isabel Foundation, enough to set up a trust fund for the child locked until she's 21. Not for Rachel. But because the child wasn't guilty. She didn't choose this life, this deception, or to be born between 2 betrayed women. Claire knew. She said nothing, just looked at me and asked one question. "Have you forgiven her?" I looked out the window. The trees drooped under the thin autumn light. And I said, "No, but I choose not to add more pain. There are truths you can't erase like scratches on a cell wall, but you can choose not to let them become chains." That night I sat alone in the attic room, now my office. I took out the leather journal which I hadn't written in since leaving the military. I opened it, and for the first time in years, let the pen lead my emotions. I once wore a rank to protect the nation. Now I wear compassion to protect myself. The first line made me pause. I read it again, then continued. "I've lived through war, and I've lived through betrayal. I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor." I wrote a few more lines, then closed the journal, placing it on the old wooden desk. Through the window, I saw a small light still on at the center. Maybe Claire was checking budgets. Maybe Logan was answering volunteer emails. Or maybe both were silent like me at the same time in different rooms, learning to live on. As I write this, I want to ask you, if you were me, would you send that money for the child? Would you invite Rachel to that final brunch, or would you do something else? Please share your thoughts. Someone out there might need to hear your perspective to keep going. And if you've read this far, thank you for staying. This journey hasn't been simple. It's full of loss-shattering and sometimes unfairness. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. The truth isn't the end. It's the beginning. I don't know where life in Colorado will take me. Maybe I'll love again. Maybe I won't. Maybe one day that child will come to me and ask about her father, and I'll tell her with all the honesty and compassion I have. Because after all, I still believe it's not what we lose that defines us. It's how we stand up after the loss. And I have stood up. I am Vivien Marshall. I am a former soldier, a sister, a wife, a woman who lost everything, then found herself in the wreckage. I am not the one left behind. I am the one who survived. My story isn't just a journey to find the truth, but a journey back to myself, where compassion overcomes pain, where a kind choice is stronger than accusations. I've learned that no one emerges from loss unscathed, but we can move forward with a braver heart. Thomas, Isabel, Logan, Rachel, each is a piece of a larger picture of love, betrayal, and forgiveness. No one is perfect, but it's how we choose to act in the end that decides who we are. If you've ever felt left behind, betrayed, or lost in life, I hope this story has touched you. You're not alone, and you have the right to live on in your own way. Please leave a comment to share your thoughts. Subscribe to follow along for more stories where life is raw, profound, and always worth retelling.